Good morning, folks. This is Keith Weber. Hey, thanks for joining in to our first Tech Talk for the new year 2021. Hey, I'm happy that Max Marno from Innovate has agreed to present today, and his presentation, as you can see on the screen, is titled EPA Metadata Editor for ArcGIS Pro. I'm excited to see what this software is all about. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Max for his presentation on the EPA Metadata Editor for ArcGIS Pro. Take it away, Max.
Thanks, Keith. I appreciate the introduction. I'd be remiss if I didn't, mention the previous three presentations as well by Wilma Robertson, yourself, Keith, and Sydney Lewis and Pam Bond. I think it kind of, metadata is a fairly complex and often invisible concept, and I'm consider myself fortunate to be the one to go last year. I think everyone there did a great job explaining some of the other concepts, and lets me sort of dive right in to this specific application and sort of a case study as far as how the United States Environmental Protection Agency curates and manages their metadata for their geospatial products. So a little plug, I guess, would just be to check out the previous videos or the previous sessions that are available on the YouTube channel as well, if something is glossed over here. So what I'm going to be highlighting today is the EPA Metadata Editor for ArcGIS Pro. I'm a developer with Innovate and the contract for the EPA. And what we're tasked with is developing and maintaining EPA Metadata Editor, which is ArcGIS Pro add-in or extension that is used by the EPA metadata curators to generate comprehensive and compliant metadata for their large inventory of geospatial assets. One such being, the Environmental Dataset Gateway, which I can show real quick. This is a online resource that is made available by the EPA and highlights a lot of publicly available data sets and information. This is one of the initiatives of the EPA, and as people have mentioned before me, and is worth reiterating, metadata is an essential part of data. If we think about sort of the idea of data and the easy analogy of an iceberg, if our metadata is everything but the what in the who, what, when, where, why, right? The data itself might be the what, but the context and how it was created, why it was created, when the last time it was updated, these are all things that are contained within the metadata. And the shape of that underlying content of the metadata is dependent on or formed by the metadata standard, the underlying metadata standard that we're using, which in the case of the EPA varies, right? We have an ever-evolving set of standards, some provided by the International Organization for Standardization, and you'll notice that that doesn't line up with what I said actually, which is ISO. They have actually standardized, their name to be consistent across multiple languages. That would vary, but the geospatial metadata environment that the EPA works in is a combination of everything you see here. It is the ISO 19115-3 XML implementation, the XML schema implementation of the ISO 19115 geographic information metadata standard. The EPA also maintains and utilizes their own technical specification and utilizes and manages all of this within the Esri ecosystem. So if we take a look at this ISO standard, International Organization for Standardization, what we'll find is consistent with a lot of other information out there, which is that this content is fairly hard to access and to interpret if if you're just going for the underlying data itself, which is provided in an XML schema, and it's required to validate, any number of elements, including your latitude, longitude. It provides information regarding the number of decimals that are supposed to be provided, and the format. So we're lucky in the sense that we have Esri products and other tools out there that allow us to manipulate the metadata in a more user-friendly format. This ISO 19115-3 standard is updated in 2016 and is the base of EPA technical spec as well. So if I open this up, what this is specifying is the information that should be present for each of these elements. These elements being the title, the description, tags. Is it required? Is it for geospatial only? The EPA maintains this technical spec as part of a hybrid between that ISO standard as well as the project open data schema, which is another another data schema that's provided and authoritative, but it makes it a fairly complex space to navigate. So what we're doing with the EPA Metadata Editor is trying to streamline some of this process and make it so that the EPA staff that are tasked with curating these metadata components don't end up with all of their hair missing at the end of the day. So what are we talking about? I just threw out a lot of different kind of jargon as far as the XML and the style sheets. Within the Esri environment, and most others that deal in editing and manipulating metadata, we have our underlying metadata, and that is, generally speaking, an XML document. That XML document is formatted according to certain standards, but it's displayed according to a completely separate style sheet, right? If you look down here, that would be the metadata viewer and display. And that in and of itself is slightly different than what we see when you open up the metadata editor and actually edit some of the elements or components, which obviously lets you, control the values that are passed to your underlying metadata in the similar way that your metadata tools are in a more automated format or sometimes manual. But I just think that this is a useful point to make in that you have an underlying metadata document or object, and then you've got a viewer or a display on top of that, which I think as Keith and Sydney noted, that style sheet can change whether you're just showing the item description or a more comprehensive view based on a more detailed or more complete metadata standard such as ISO 19115 standard. And that's what we're looking at here, right? When you open up this catalog preview and you select the metadata, this viewer shows you your metadata elements in a fairly static and specific format that changes based on the metadata standard that you select in your metadata options. And I'll kind of show you a little bit how that works as well. But what you're seeing here is the values present for those metadata elements if they exist. There is the option to edit this through something like the ArcGIS Pro Metadata Toolkit, which is related to the Pro SDK and a custom implementation that you might want to generate. But this style sheet is what you see when you look at the metadata, and that's separate from what you're going to get if you open up the metadata editor itself, right? So if you were to right-click a feature class within ArcGIS Pro and hit edit metadata, then you would be brought to a completely separate display or version of that underlying XML. So what these are doing is actually grabbing the metadata elements and throwing them in an input box and allowing the user to manipulate those. what you see here in terms of the validation at the top there, the tags element, as well as any custom highlighting, that's all based on that underlying ISO standard and helps the user generate compliant metadata. Then we've got kind of that third component, which are the metadata tools. A lot of what EME does, a lot of the functionality that we've tried to provide is extending some of the functionality that's present already in ArcGIS Pro. Down here at the bottom, these are the existing metadata tools that are provided stock, with ArcGIS Pro, at least as of I think this is from version 2.6. And then you can see, the EME tool, EME Pro, provides a number of other tools, as well as some that are, the same, but maybe have a more EPA specific functionality. And I'll delve into a little bit of what that functionality is and why we've implemented some of these tools that make it easier to create that metadata. So again, what is EME Pro? What we provide is an Esri add-in, and it installs a Python toolbox, as well as changes the Pro UI. It adds that ribbon up at the top with a bunch of buttons that link to geoprocessing tools. And it was developed with ArcGIS Pro Metadata Toolkit and the Pro SDK for .NET, and that Python toolbox. Those Python tools are triggered when you click the button at the top of their Pro UI. The EME tool that I'm talking about is actually, part of an ongoing development project that has been regularly updated since 2007. You can see this is one of the earlier versions here, the 3-tab editor that some of our more senior staff have actually worked on as well. And it's evolved from, this standalone Windows Presentation Foundation, the WPF app, into our catalog, being integrated into our catalog, and now finally in the EME Pro iteration as an ArcGIS Pro add-in. So at this point, I'll open up ArcGIS Pro and kind of give you an idea of some of the tools that we've implemented that make life easier for the EPA metadata curators, and show you what that looks like and why it makes it easier. So if we open up ArcGIS Pro, again, we've got our stock metadata tools. If I open up a metadata record and view this metadata here, you can see it's configured to show me, more than just the item description, and that's by virtue of specifying the ISO 19115-3 and the more complete style sheet here. One thing that you'll note is you can come in here, open up the geography, and look at the thumbnail. I think if I come into here, this preview, I can change the base map and update the thumbnail. There we go, and create a thumbnail. Then if I navigate back to the metadata itself and give it time to reload, I'll see that thumbnail has been updated. So this is one piece of functionality that we were able to kind of improve on, or at least give folks the opportunity to do this in batch. The update thumbnail tool, and I'll give this a sec to load, hopefully it does so soon. There we go. So now we've got our updated thumbnail. Within the EME tools, we've provided the option to select multiple features, select a base map, and update those in bulk. It doesn't block the UI, and it does a couple other cool things behind the scenes, but allowing people to update these metadata elements in batch or in bulk is a theme that you'll kind of see throughout this. Another useful metadata editor or EME tool piece of functionality is upgrade to ArcGIS. So if you have FGDC or FGDC CSDGM records, which is a different metadata standard ArcGIS Pro will not read that immediately. So I've got an example here of a piece of CSDGM metadata. So this would be just an XML format, but if I import this into a metadata record, you'll see that it would show the same thing, right? It would essentially overwrite this. So if this is my target metadata, and I go ahead and import this CSDGM record, then you'll see this item has been authored, or this item has authored FGDC metadata, must be upgraded before it can be used in ArcGIS Pro. So one of the things that the custom EME upgrade tool does is it performs a cleanup. If you were to copy this metadata record and then perform an upgrade, a number of those elements would be lost. So in order to make sure that none of the all of the metadata that can be preserved is, just performs an extra step and make sure that the metadata is preserved in its entirety. There we go. Next, I think it's good to take a look at this merge tool. One common request is the ability to merge metadata records between two feature classes or a template piece of metadata. And what this tool allows you to do is just that according to custom merge rules. Sorry. So if you think about an inner or outer join, or if both of your metadata records involved in the merge contain the same element, then which one gets priority? What that looks like is this. So we've got over here a sample metadata record, and then we've also got these custom merge tools, which is what are used by the EME merge tool. It contains a specific XPath expression, and what that represents is selecting the metadata element, the label, and then is default tag, which controls which direction or which metadata element will take precedence in the event of a merge conflict, right? If they're both in one of the, if the element is in both metadata records. So this tool is pre-populated with this template metadata. So if I go ahead and just throw it in here, and then we'll take a look at what the result is. Notice, I'll refresh here. And you'll see that a number of these elements were not replaced, right? The description was not replaced with anything in the template metadata because it doesn't exist. That being said, the credits, for example, I don't think they existed in the original record, and so the template metadata element was merged in. Next, I think, I'm not sure if I'm going to run out of time here or not. One thing that's difficult to manage in these metadata records are contacts. If I open this up, I'll open up a different record actually. Yeah. So if I open up this metadata record and look at our contacts, these contacts are somewhat hairy to navigate, and you'll see that in my version, due to the presence of our EPA or EME tool, we've got these pre-populated with a number of EPA contacts. This is controlled by a custom contact syncer that goes and fetches contacts from an online XML source. But it's also possible to edit and maintain these through the EME DB manager. And what this does is it allows you to edit and select defaults for a number of metadata categories, such as keywords and sorry, context is maintained just through that sync process. But keywords here, we can determine, which are selected as default. So if I select all of these, or maybe I want to change agriculture to lowercase and update the keyword. Then when I come in here and edit my keywords, you'll notice I've got a load defaults here. And if I add the EPA keywords section here, then my defaults populate. Oh, that's place. There we go. And you'll see, agriculture has been updated there, and then I've got my defaults to populate like that. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and it takes away a lot of the menial work that might have to be repeated, for every single metadata record. It can tend to drag on, as anyone who's edited metadata before knows. Another thing that you'll notice that we've implemented is a custom validation process. So the validation processes that are already present within ArcGIS Pro flag your elements at the top here. Please select a keyword. So if we go in and select a keyword, then or remove it, then you'll see that that validation error goes away. If we look at something like, let me find one here, yeah, quality. So one thing that we did to make this process a little easier to navigate is just including a validation hint. So these are just subsequent messages that are noted within this validation box here that kind of give the user an idea of where the validation error is occurring. So either a conformance result or a quantitative result is required. That's a bit nebulous. So we're able to say a validation hint, it's within a report, and conformance result or quantitative result is required. So I know that, it's in one of these subcomponents with the report title. And then I can see that I need to add a conformance result to each of these report components, or a quantitative result, right? And there's a number of other validation errors going on here as far as title, quantitative value, but this gives the user a little bit more insight as to where the validation errors are happening. As far as, one thing I'd like to note is the development process for EME Pro. We're able to leverage the ArcGIS Pro metadata toolkit, which provides kind of some, it's a really great development environment, and allows you to control, what do you want the underlying metadata standard to be? And then you've got the ability to manipulate both, this editor level, as far as what validation rules are applied, which elements are present on each of the pages here on the left side navigator, as well as, this metadata style sheet that's used for display. Then all of the Python tools, or everything up here in the toolbar, are Python tools that are triggered through the Pro UI. So much of that functionality is provided through the ArcPy metadata module, and you're able to edit any of that just by, you're able to implement much of that functionality through ArcPy, but this makes it obviously a lot more user-friendly. We've included a toolbox path that shows you, if a power user wants to get in there and look at the Python tools themselves, they can take a look here. But we've tried to be as transparent as possible. At this point, I think that's all I've got. I hope that someone in the audience here has some questions or wants to, drill down a little further, and I'll open up the floor.
Well, we are at the top of the hour, folks, and thank you everyone for joining in. We'll have another Tech Talk coming up in about a month from now. So I hope you enjoyed this Tech Talk. Thanks once again, Max, for doing this. And I will hopefully see you all later. Take care.
Thanks, Keith.
Yeah, thank you.